ordinarily 4,500 people would leave prison every month. We're not talking a significant increase on the current volumes of that, and that matters because we put £700 million into probation. We need really good probation services that can deal with the workload. I'm confident that is the case.
The government has already announced a pause to the early release scheme for prisoners. This morning, the new Prime Minister has made some changes to the scheme. He's blocking cuts to sentences for rape, serious child sex and other grooming offences. He says he'd like to have gone further but can't without the prison system collapsing. Let's speak now to the Justice Secretary, Alex Norris, who joins us from Westminster. Alex, morning to you.
Morning, Stig. Thanks for having me.
Great pleasure. Congratulations on the new job as well. Wes Streeting made a joke about you being the person responsible in government for letting people out of prison early. That's still true today. You've changed who you are going to let out of prison, but there are still serious offenders being let out early under your watch.
Well, Stig, as you know, when we took government 2 years ago, we were days away from running out of prison places, which would have meant that we weren't able to arrest or detain criminals. That, of course, is an intolerable situation. Since then, we've launched the biggest building programme since the Victorian era, and we've made very important changes to sentencing that mean that, yes, some perpetrators will leave prison earlier but under stricter controls for a longer period of time. Nevertheless, we know the anxieties that that's causing for victims and survivors and for their families. So the Prime Minister as a new Prime Minister, myself as a new Justice Secretary, have looked again at who is eligible for that scheme and made some very important changes, removing from it those who've committed the offence of rape, removing from it those who've committed child sex offences. We would like to have gone further. The Prime Minister said that in your own newspaper only today. We would like to have gone further, but this is as far as we can go, whilst ensuring that we still have prison places to make sure we still have a justice system.
I mean, one of the reasons you had to review the policy was because of the outrage, because of the killers of PC Andrew Harper were going to be released early. They were convicted of manslaughter, not murder. And yet you reviewed this policy because of that, because there was legitimate outrage about their early release, and they're still going to be released early.
I mean, there is, very strong feeling, exactly as you say. The death of Andrew Harper was something that shocked the nation. I can't imagine what the family's been through and are going through. And
well, you spoke to them, didn't you?
Indeed, I did last night. To talk about the changes that we are making, the changes that we aren't able to make. We've heard, of course, from victims of all sorts of crimes. That's why we did look at it again. As frankly, as a new Justice Secretary, Stig, you'd expect that I'm looking at all aspects of policy afresh and anew. We would have liked to have gone further than we've been able to, but we have been able to remove rapists and child sex offenders from this scheme. I would want to assure listeners as well of just how significant the controls that be put in place on those who do leave prison. One of the perpetrators of the death of Andrew Harper is not eligible at all. He's one of 18,000 people, because of the nature of his sentence, has never been eligible for this scheme. Two of them, because of the nature of their scheme, may well be eligible. For people in that circumstance, there are very strict controls that will be put in place, whether that's around where they can go, whether that's around the first time of presumption on tagging, whether that's drugs, alcohol controls, whether that's what public events they can go to. This will not be for any person released under this progression model. This will not be a scot-free model. This will be very, very significant controls. In fact, the widest range of controls we've ever had at our fingertips.
Let's talk about the victims in all of this. We've heard from victims who learn about the release of their attackers by standard emails. You're talking about the follow-up service that you're offering. Can you give us your assurance that every victim will be given a personal, bespoke support, the chance to speak to someone and understand what's happening to the people who perpetrated crimes against them?
Yes, everyone on the victim contact scheme will get that. What will happen
Not
next
a standard email, because we've had standard emails.
No, bespoke, Stig. Let me just talk through how that will work. First of all, they will be written to saying about the changes that have happened. That will be followed up with a direct, not written, but oral, verbal engagement with a victim liaison officer who will talk to them about what the update is for their individual perpetrator, what their new release date might be. And then, crucially, what they want to see put in place in terms of controls so that they can live their lives freely and without fear. And as I say, those tools are significant, and that can be taken into account on the controls on the perpetrator to make sure the victims, who should be central to all this, can live their lives fully. We're augmenting that with £10 million of extra victim support, so there is support to get to the right information in a timely manner. But my commitment is that direct contact, bespoke contact, so people aren't having to fill in the blanks or rely on internet speculation, but a hearing from us, our team, about what's going to happen and what support we can put in place.
Some of the most pernicious offenders, some of the people who will be given the most concern to victims are domestic abusers. They are, when they return out of prison, the consequence of that can be the most significant in many respects. Why are they not excluded?
Well, again, we've had to make a decision on exclusion. We haven't been able to include domestic abuse perpetrators. I've spent, as you may well know, Stig, my entire parliamentary career.
Why though?
Campaigning.
Explain to us why. Because there's any number of people in prison. Why not domestic abusers? Exclude them?
Because the current trajectory that we're on, Stig, were we to exclude, make very broad exclusions, we would run out of prison places in October or November this year. So think what that means. That then means that an individual who, say, is subject to a domestic abuse protection order, a restraining order, or controls on their domestic abuse would be perhaps getting arrested and going to a police station and then being bailed home again. We've had to take that balance between offenders in the system and the controls that we could put on them when released against offenders in the future, and making sure we have a functioning justice system. And I know that causes anxiety and upset in that choice. However, as I say, if we don't do that, we have a justice system that breaks down. We're not arresting anybody, or we're having to do emergency releases of significant numbers of people without the controls I'm talking about. We will never allow that as a government. I won't allow that as a justice sector.
So you've made these
That's why we found this balance.
You made this difficult decision. About 5,000 people were set for early release from next month in the previous version of the scheme. So how many will no longer be released as a result of this change? How many people are you keeping in prison who otherwise would have been let out?
It's about 1,000 people. That 5,000 is not quite correct, Stig, though.
OK, so tell me the numbers as are correct. How many are going to be released early, and how many have you kept in as a result of these changes?
So initially 6,000 people were in scope. We have taken 1,000, as I say, rapists and child sex offenders out of this now. The remaining 5,000 people will be released in 10 tranches over 10 months. I'd like to set that into a bit of context, Stig, for you and for listeners. Ordinarily 4,500 people would leave prison every month. We're not talking a significant increase on the current volumes of that, and that matters because we put £700 million into probation. We need really good probation services that can deal with the workload. I'm confident that is the case.
Because no one who has any contact with the probation service would say it's really good. People just wouldn't. People would laugh at you if you suggest that. People would say this is not a functioning service. People would say to you, Alex Norris. That's what the inspectorate has said. That's what people who work in it say. It is not a functioning service. The British probation service.
Well, I mean, firstly, Stig, I wouldn't want, because there will be listening to us right now, probation workers going to work who put a really hard shift in and do, in my view, very good work. But I would accept systemic failings in the past. We know certainly the previous government's record in this place. That's why we've made significant investment in probation. That's why we're recruiting more probation officers. And crucially, as I say, giving them a much wider set of tools to work with. So,
but can that be ready by October when these people start to get released? It can't be, can it?
Well, those tools are available now. So those tools will be available. We're going to be able to put many of those controls in place immediately. So, we totally believe that effective probation is at the heart of it. Again, I'd want that message to be clear to listeners that, this isn't just bog standard licence and, people left be. This is a significant bespoke package of controls that if they breach, they're liable for return to prison, and that's the balance that we've struck.
A couple of people have got in touch over having this conversation, Alex, and saying there are more than 10,000 foreign prisoners. That's your answer. There's your answer right there. If you get the prison population down from 87,000 to 77,000 by getting rid of the foreign prisoners, you've solved the problem.
Well, it is part of the solution. And indeed, that's part of the progress that we've made whilst being in government so far. We've increased removal of foreign offenders by nearly a third on the equivalent period under our predecessors. I would want to be a little bit careful with that, though, Stig, because when we talk about removal of foreign offenders under our normal FNO removal scheme, they serve no more of their sentence when they get home.
Yes, now, there's a moral question there, isn't it, Alex, you're getting into? Would we rather someone who's committed a serious offence be punished in a British prison or allowed to go home and not be punished at all?
Essentially that, and frankly, Stig, we come back to the same conversation we're having now, because the regime that we've set has meant that murderers are not part of it, terrorists are not part of it, and they never were. We've extended that so rapists aren't part of it, so serious child abusers aren't part of it. We will have the same conversation around foreign offenders too. In the Sentencing Act we have the ability to remove people very, very early, indeed pretty much at the point of conviction. People will rightly want to know, victims will rightly want to know who we are and aren't going to use that power with, which would take us back to the same conversation we're having today. So I appreciate that that's an important part of the puzzle. Indeed, I think that it is too. I don't think it's the sole solution, though.
When does this end as a crisis? Because you're saying you're going to build more prisons, but that's not going to happen immediately. By next year, as Justice Secretary, will you be confident that we have enough prison space? Because you're going to get rid of 5,000 people out of prisons now, extra to what would be the normal churn. Is there a point next year? When can you tell us this is going to be over as a situation?
This is the exact point. What we've seen over the years is that we reach saturation, then there's an emergency release scheme that buys a degree of relief while we try some other things, and we're back to square one. That will not happen, happily, thanks to the work that we've been doing over the last 2 years. You talk about prison places being long term. I accept that. It's 14,000 places coming online, but 3,200 of them have already. These things are happening now, but making the significant changes that we're making through the Sentencing Act is about exactly ensuring that we're not back this time next year having this conversation. It's about ensuring that long-term future. That's why we've made the changes we've made. That's why we've made the decisions we've made.
Just before you go, Alex, I'm not one of these people who bemoan politicians going on holiday. I'm really not. Clear they're entitled to go on holiday. And yet, Andy Burnham started his job, the most important job in the country, when he manoeuvred himself into 2 weeks ago, and now he's off abroad. He tells us he's involved in the most important rewiring of the country ever, and 2 weeks into an important job, he's off on holiday. Is it really time for him to have a break?
Well, I understand he's having a few days with his family. I know, knowing the Prime Minister, that will not be him stopping working. He'll be in constant contact with his team. Indeed, Stig, I've spoken to him pretty much every day since I joined the Cabinet, and I suspect that may carry on to be the case. But, look how we've used our time so far, whether it's support with the cost of living, whether it's work on defence, whether it's social care, whether it's housing and homelessness. This is a government that's getting on with purpose, and that's what we're going to see this week, next week, and every week, that we are the government.
Alex Norris, good to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks.
He is the Justice Secretary there, Alex Norris.
And there was lots in that interview, lots of information, including about the numbers of people involved, which was something we were trying to get to the bottom of this morning. Alex Norris said 6,000 people were originally in scope for early release, and these changes have removed 1,000 people. 5,000 people will be released in 10 tranches over the next 10 months. That's from later on this year.